Welcome to Wednesday. We are officially in mid-December, which means keening season is in full swing. Keening season is just a delightful time of year, which usually runs from about mid-November to the end of January, when the UK press celebrate how keen Kate Middleton is to work harder next year. This year is a special year because it not only marks the 10th anniversary of keening season, but also backs into Kate's milestone 40th birthday. Now, the definition of someone being keen commonly means eager, interested, or enthusiastic, which is ironic since despite keen being the word most commonly associated with Kate, it is difficult to find examples of her being eager, interested, or enthusiastic, really at any event unless it involves celebrities or a sport. Keening season, like any UK royals and press collaboration, has to be divided into pre-Meghan and post-Meghan eras. As I've discussed in other videos, the press started treating the Cambridges differently once Meghan entered the scene. I would still argue that no one benefited more from the press attacking Meghan than Kate Middleton. So let's talk about keening seasons 2011 through 2015. This festive season was originally born out of necessity. What the deranged like to forget is that early in the marriage, there was actually quite a bit of consternation from UK press outlets towards the newly minted Duchess of Cambridge, wife of the future heir. First came the news they were going to be part-time senior royals. A title you will remember was denied to Harry and Meghan 10 years later. This announcement would lead to years of consternation about engagement numbers. The concern over Kate's work ethic actually started before the wedding, with the Queen leaking in 2008 that she was concerned that Kate had never really had a job. I would argue for the sake of argument that William never really had a job either, but that's neither here nor there. So, two things happen in December. The first is that people start tallying up engagement numbers for the royal family. The second is that the royals gear up to go on their winter vacation, usually lasting the week of Christmas through January, although those dates are not set in stone. Keening season really revolves around two important events. The first is an uptick in engagements for both Will and Kate at the end of the year. The second is a barrage of articles promising that Kate is keen to do better next year. Before we talk about actual engagement numbers, we have to talk about how royal engagements are counted, which, my friends, to be frank, is pretty bull, especially when it comes to royal tours. Both private and public engagements are counted on the court circular, which can include meetings, events, etc. There's no oversight to this count, and often individual news outlets will come out with their own engagement numbers. There are also sometimes discrepancies over what counts as an official engagement, and there seems to be no hard and fast rule. It can sometimes change from royal to royal. Also, before we talk about actual numbers, I want to be clear that Kate showing up to a school for 30 minutes counts as an engagement. Pre-Meghan, the Rhoda actually used to complain about how short her engagements were. They would take shots at how poor her small talk abilities were, and to be frank, still are. Like I mentioned previously, royal tours get especially heinous, with every stop, including landing at an airport, counting as an engagement, with some even split and counting as two. So you get these tour days that had, 8+ engagements alone, which really artificially boosts the number. So I have to go on an aside here and talk about maternity leave. I want to be blunt in saying that I personally believe that every parent should get paid leave after having a child. I do not fault Kate for taking leave after her children were born. My critique here lies in the fact that outside of her maternity leaves, her engagement numbers have been criminally low. Those low numbers have been artificially boosted by high engagement tours, meaning that her actual working days a lot of times are less than a month out of a year. There is also an argument that Diana was put to work too much with too many patronages and extremely high engagement counts right out of the gate. I acknowledge that argument. Again, my critique here is that the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction. 10 years in, Kate has 19 patronages, with her going years in between visiting some of them. There is also the issue of Kate's severe morning sickness, hyperemesis gravidarium. I can never pronounce that second one. It's more common than people think and can be absolutely devastating. But in Exhibit 1293 of the Invisible Contract, Kate jetted off to Mystique in January of 2013, less than a month after telling the UK taxpayer she was too ill to work. There was some muttering at the time, but can you imagine if that had been Meghan, or really any other politician or celebrity. I've said this before in my videos, but my number one issue surrounding Kate's low engagement numbers and her role as a mother is that her defenders have repeatedly either alluded to or just plainly stated that she's being a good mom by barely working, and expecting her to work more despite being on the royal payroll would somehow make her a worse mother, which is an exceptionally privileged and classist sentiment. I'm not saying that Kate should be putting in 12-hour shifts 6 days a week like some NHS nurses are. We're pointing out that Kate doesn't really appear to work at all and has full-time household staff, including a live-in nanny. So let's talk actual engagement numbers for the pre-Meghan era. 2011 was 35-ish, 2012 111, 36 or 32% of which came from their 9-day Southeast Asia tour. 2013 was 40-ish, George was born that year. 2014, 105, with 59 engagements from the 3-week Australian tour, so half were just from one tour. 2015 was 55. Charlotte was born that year. As you can again see, engagement counts aren't actually a good metric of actual working days, which are considerably less during the years there is a royal tour. For reference, during this time, other senior royals, including the elderly Queen, Charles, and Anne, were all pushing between 300 to 400 each a year. So, in order to clean up the stench of a work-shy future who is being outpaced 3 to 4 times by elderly family members, we get keening season. Again, pre-Meghan, keening season was much more interesting, with the press being much more willing to take shots at the Cambridges' work history. Although the royals would always find at least one outlet or two which would come up with the promises of Kate doing better next year. Now, I pointed out that this year is different. Not only does it mark 10 years of Keen, but it also falls in line with Kate's 40th birthday. This is going to be interesting as the press has insisted on infantilizing Kate since she married into the family in order to explain her poor work ethic and middling at best performance when she does decide to show up. Now that Kate is looking at the beginning of middle age and, to be blunt, is starting to show physical signs of aging, I wonder what their next excuse for her poor performance will be. Not to mention that kids don't stay young forever. They're eventually going to run out of these excuses. I think it can be summed up in this very weird excerpt, which I think was actually meant to be kind to Kate, but is decidedly not. It comes from Tessa Dunlop and goes on to say that basically it's good that Kate's always looked kind of old because she's gonna be old in public for a long time, and she was a lamb dressed as mutton, and now at last mutton is where it's at. I don't know what that really even means, but it's clear that there is going to be an issue with how the press has always portrayed Kate as this kind of, again, infant just getting ready to learn, and a woman who is turning 40 who has supposedly 10 years of experience behind her belt. Or mutton, as this Tessa lady says. Yikes. As we move into the post-Meghan era, things of course change. We go from the press dissing Will and Kate's work record to treating them as saints. I've said this before, and although I can't prove it, I strongly believe there's been an effort to clean up old articles. From my Tumblr days, I can remember headlines and tweets that you just cannot find anymore. Not only has Kate benefited from the press sainting her in exchange for demonizing Meghan, COVID has given her another kind of convenient out. So let's talk engagement numbers for 2016 on. 2016, 140, a whopping 71 of which occurred during their tours to Canada and India. 2017, 105. She spent time off with HG. 42 of those engagements occurred on that year's tour. 2018 was 77. Louis was born. 2019, 120. 2020, 79, mostly Zoom. And when you look at actual working days, it's pretty abysmal when you factor in tours. Kate also has the lowest number of patronages of any senior working royal, but still only does an engagement with them on average once a year. Some of her patronages get nothing, despite the fact that she could do an engagement with each of them once a month and still not even technically work full-time. Now, of course, since Meghan arrived, we've actually seen kind of the expansion of keening season, whereas the articles used to be kind of, contained that November to endish of January. We now see them all year, but we do see an increase at the end of the year, an increase in the amount of articles just fawning over Kate and promising, this year's numbers are bad, but next year's going to be the year. I do have to chime in here and say that the last 2 keening seasons, this year included, have been a little messy engagement-wise. Last year, the Cambridges went on the Pandemic Express, an expensive train tour that no one wanted, including the elected heads of 2 countries they visited. This year, Kate has had 3 pretty meh engagements. The first where she appeared bored or pissy even in the official photographs. The second where she was curt and then dismissed by school children asking about Harry and Meghan. Her Christmas Carol event that for all but the most ardent royalists was pretty meh. But still, thanks to the invisible contract, the UK press keeps churning out article after article about, again, yeah, they know this year wasn't the best. Next year, it's going to be it. Every year. We've done this every year for 10 years. And it still isn't it. Because if you think about it, they have to. For better or for worse, William and Kate are the future of the monarchy. I found this article from Australian outlet The Courier Mail, which came out this month and is actually quite cutting in certain ways. The first is that they point out that Will and Kate are the most expensive royals. They point out that Will and Kate receive an estimated $4.2 million from the Duchy of Cornwall, which, if divided by their combined engagement number of 347 this year, comes out to $12,000 per outing. Most of those engagements were done on Zoom. $12,000. Okay. This article also gets right to the point. Buckingham Palace desperately needs the Cambridges to be held with some degree of respect by the masses to win widespread approval, which is why anything that introduces even the vaguest suggestion that they might be overpaid part-timers is inherently dangerous. Anything that dings or tarnishes the Cambridges' reputation is in effect dinging the chances of the monarchy lasting. It's interesting to me that instead of holding William and Kate responsible for their low engagement numbers, the royal family has instead decided to lean into the invisible contract with the press to try and convince those masses that Will and Kate are something that they are not. But I guess when it comes down to it, they might not have a choice.